This is All of It. I'm Allison Stewart, live from the WNYC studios in Soho. Thank you for sharing part of your day with us. I'm really grateful that you're here. On today's show, a film series devoted to the work of Wallace Shawn is now at the Metrograph, and he joins us to talk about his life and work, along with curator John Early and theater director Lucas Kane. Law professor Frederick Vars is here to talk about his new book, Through the Fire, How People with Mental Illness Are Empowering Each Other, and we'll learn about how the U.S. men's soccer team is preparing for the World Cup. That's our plan, so let's get this started with the 30th anniversary of Into Thin Air. In May of 1996, 30 years ago, 8 climbers lost their lives when a devastating blizzard hit Mount Everest. One of the survivors was author and journalist Jon Krakauer, who was there to write a story for Outside magazine. He barely escaped with his life. John's book about the experience, Into Thin Air, has become a contemporary classic of memoir and nonfiction writing. John intended for the book to be a wake-up call, to shine a spotlight on the ways commercialization and recklessness have made climbing Everest a deadly prospect. But 30 years later, climbing Mount Everest remains more popular than ever before. In a new foreword for Into Thin Air, John writes, "The deadly hazards I wrote about attracted novice climbers to Everest like gamblers to a slot machine." So what has changed? What has stayed the same since the deadly disaster of 1996? Joining me now to discuss is the author of Into Thin Air and many, many other acclaimed novels and bestsellers, acclaimed books, Jon Krakauer. It is so nice to meet you, by the way.
It's nice to meet you.
Listeners, John is taking your questions and comments. What do you remember about reading Into Thin Air? What questions do you have for Jon Krakauer about the disaster or about the experience of climbing Mount Everest? Our phone number is 212-433-9692, 212-433-WNYC. Let's get in the Wayback Machine. Take us back to your life. What was going on with you personally and professionally when you decided to accept this assignment from Outside magazine?
My freelance writing career was just kind of starting to be tenable, just starting to be barely above the poverty line, and I was working on Into the Wild, the book, when the call came, do you want to go to Mount Everest? And I had thought I was no longer interested in Mount Everest. I was sort of a snob. I was a serious rock climber and thought, Mount Everest, nah, too easy. But as soon as I had a chance...
Wait, Mount Everest was too easy?
Well, it's a long story. But no, as soon as it was actually, no, you can really do this magazine, I was like, yeah, who doesn't want to climb Mount Everest? So I was didn't have to think. I was ready to go.
You know, as you said, you were an experienced climber. You talk about the different mountains that you've scaled. What was impossible for you to truly prepare for climbing Mount Everest with retrospect?
What was impossible?
Yeah, like you thought, what would make it so difficult?
Oh, I mean, Everest, for me, I'd never been higher than 17,000 feet, and I knew enough to know that then try to climb something that's 29,000 feet, that's pushing, that's not good. You need to have experience at what happens to your body at altitude. But I was willing to, I'll deal. That was the main thing. Climbing at altitude, and I had no idea, climbing at altitude was so much more involved and difficult and fraught than I ever imagined. So I was really unprepared for that.
What was fraught about it?
Just when you don't have oxygen, the way your brain doesn't function, the way I didn't know your body by the time you get to 17,000 feet is deteriorating slowly. The higher you go, the more it deteriorates. You can't put on weight. You can't really build muscle. I was trying to work hard to stay fit or get fitter. And what I was really doing is just getting exhausted. All that energy I was using in April, I should have been saving for May when I was going to be up on the mountain. So I was doing a lot of things wrong because I didn't know what it was like to climb at altitude. Your judgment is so distorted. And when you get up on the upper mountain, like above 27,000 feet, you really need that bottled oxygen. I really need it. There's climbers who acclimatize and can do it without, but I'm not an exceptional. I'm not an elite athlete. I'm a pretty normal person, and normal people will die if they don't have that bottled oxygen.
When you think back to that experience on Everest, which sense comes back to you first? The sense of sight, sound?
Well, it's complicated for me because the first sense is a sense of shame and guilt for being party to that disaster. But on good days, I still remember. I remember the morning we decided to go for the summit. It had been a big windstorm. We didn't think we would get a chance. It dawned the morning, we were going to leave at 11:30, like at 10 or something. Rob Hall, our leader, said, "We're going for it." And God, it was just a beautiful night. It was like 30 below, cold, but crystal clear. I'd never seen so many stars. There was a moon out, and you could look to the south towards India, and you could see the monsoon approaching, just this wall of thunderheads, lightning shooting up into the sky in the distance. You couldn't hear any thunder, of course, but it was fantastic. It was one of the greatest days of climbing I ever had, and you're moving into territory I could scarcely imagine. And it seemed to be going really well, and to watch the sun come up, it was just incredible. I still have very vivid memories of that morning.
You talk about in the introduction about how many of the details about what happened were a bit fuzzy, and you could ask 4 people what happened, and they would tell you totally different things. What factor contributed to that? People having wildly different recollections.
I think the hypoxia, lack of oxygen to the brain. I mean, it affects your judgment. It affects your memory. It affects your ability to do anything remotely physically strenuous. It's hard to explain. I mean, it also, because it's not just that you have this oxygen mask on, you have these goggles on. I felt like I was kind of in this spacesuit cut off from reality. And it was this weird sense of being drugged. And I'm walking along the summit ridge toward the summit. One step, 4 breaths. One step like every 30 seconds. It's really slow. And there's 8,000-foot drop to one side and 7,000 foot to the other. And we hadn't fixed ropes. So we're not tied to anybody. We're not tied to a rope. If you tripped, you would die. And so you have to and you're kind of in this drug state, like, wow, is this even real? Is this a screen? And you have to remind yourself it's real. And if you trip, you're going to die. So you have to keep telling yourself, stay alert, stay alert. This is for real. And it sounds stupid, but up there, if you don't remind yourself, you could easily come to grief.
It also sounds like you had to be self-contained, like you almost had to just focus on yourself and not the people around you.
Well, yeah, and that was partly the nature of guided climbing. Guides, you have all these clients you've never climbed with. They haven't necessarily been honest about their experience or skill. You can't trust them to take care of themselves. Guides don't tell you this. They don't tell their clients, but every guide I know, they have this joke they tell. There's only 2 things you need to know to be a successful guide. 1, the clients are trying to kill themselves. 2, the client is trying to kill you. And so the guides are very wary. Clients, they don't want them to have any agency. They don't want to make decisions on their own. You are indoctrinated from the time you get there to do what they tell you and nothing else. They are the authority. Do not take your own initiative. And that was really difficult for me. And in the end, it really complicated my feelings about. It's no excuse, but if I hadn't been guided, I would have never made some of the decisions. If I was with my friends tied to, I would have had this sense of team and companion. You know, when you're a guided client, you're never tied into anyone else, and everyone's kind of in it for themselves. It was really one of the best things about climbing, if you're not climbing alone, which I do a lot, is this bond you have with your partner, because it's really intimate. You have your lives are in each other's hands, like not metaphorically, very literally, and that's taken away on these guided climbs. At least for me. I mean, I can't speak for. I'm not used to being guided. I'm used to doing it myself. So it was a very strange way to climb the mountain. I mean, Everest is one of the few, maybe the only mountain where I felt like I wasn't really climbing it, because on every other mountain I've climbed, I carry this heavy pack with my tent and my food and my fuel. And on Everest, the Sherpas do all that. The Sherpas put up the ropes. You are just, being led up the mountain, and you don't have to. It's another way that you're not sort of being self-reliant. And for me, climbing is all about self-reliance. That's one of the great things about it.
My guest is author Jon Krakauer. It's the 30th anniversary of the fatal disaster on Mount Everest that took 8 lives. It was the subject of Jon's acclaimed book, Into Thin Air, a personal account of the Mount Everest disaster. The new edition is out now. Listeners, Jon Krakauer is taking your calls. What questions do you have about Into Thin Air? Our number is 212-433-9692, 212-433-WNYC. You also write that in your life, people told you to take more time for yourself to understand what happened before writing Into Thin Air. Maybe you needed a few years to distance yourself. You did not take that advice.
No.
Why didn't you listen?
I had this desperate need I was really messed up. I had PTSD. I didn't know it or wouldn't acknowledge it, but I was very traumatized, severely traumatized. I was angry. I was frustrated. I felt deep shame, deep guilt. And I thought if I could just write about it, it would be cathartic and it would somehow allow me to come to grips with it. It didn't do that at all. But one reason I'm glad I did it then, it's a more honest book. I think my feelings come through. I mean, I think that the emotion, those senses come through the way I wrote it. It would have been a very different book if I'd written 3 years. And I think I would have lost something about the honesty of how I felt and the honesty of the experience by writing it so soon. I don't regret doing that.
What did you want this book to represent to the people who lost loved ones?
I wanted to be as accurate as I could. I wanted them to know what happened because if I had lost a son or a daughter or a brother, I would want to know exactly what happened, all of it. I would want it straight, and I felt a duty to tell it straight to the best I could. I really came to 4 members of my expedition died. 2 of the 3 guides and 2 clients. One of the clients, Doug Hansen, I had become very close to. I shared a tent with much of it. One of the guides, Andy Harris, the youngest junior guide, he and I were really alike in a lot of ways. So I was really close to both those men, and both of them were killed, and that messed me up. And I wanted to, for their families, his sister, Doug's sister Diane, Andy's partner Fiona, his parents, and after the expedition, 2 years later, Andy Harris's parents and Doug's sister and I and my wife went back to Everest and built a memorial just below base camp for the people we lost, and that was a very powerful experience.
Of the climbers that lived, at least one, Sandy Hill, then Sandy Pittman, had a very different take on what happened, and she said the book caused her some pain. Have you spoken to her?
The last time I spoke with her was when I fact-checked the book, and she asked me, it was all off the record. We did check some facts. I felt sorry for her. She was villainized and humiliated. I mean, Sandy thinks, I know Sandy's upset with the book, but I don't know. I wrote it as accurate as I could. I think she takes issue. You can read her book or her talk. I don't talk to her and read my book and make up your own mind. She was a main character. She was a celebrity at Everest. She was, she was seeking attention and publicity, and it came back to bite her. And I think she feels my book was responsible. What was really responsible, in my view, was the Vanity Fair piece. Did you ever see that?
Oh, yes.
It was really brutal. So, I don't know what to say. I feel bad for Sandy. She did not cause the tragedy she was any more than any of the rest of us did. There was a cascade of small errors and bad decisions and bad luck, and when it hit critical mass, everything went to hell. But she certainly was not to blame.
Let's take a call. Stuart is calling from Manhattan. Hi, Stuart. Thanks for calling All of It.
Hi there. Yes. Well, I'm interested in the story. I read Into Thin Air back around the time it came out, as I recall, and I'm not a climber myself. I did climb Kilimanjaro and love looking at stars from 19,000 feet, so I resonate with what Jon said earlier. My question is about Anatoly Bukharev, who wrote a book, a rejoinder, I believe, called The Climb. And I can't remember, it's been so long, what the central contention was and the difference of point of view that he offered. But I'd be interested in John's discussion of another professional who was on that climb and some of the maybe tensions or disagreements in the way the history is represented now.
Yeah, I mean, Anatoly Bukharev at the time was one of the strongest, most talented high-altitude climbers in the world. He might have been the best. I praised him for that. He was a Russian who had a very different idea of guiding than Westerners do, including the leader of his expedition, Scott Fisher. Anatoly believed clients shouldn't be coddled. As he told me several times and many other people, if client cannot get to top on his own, should not be there. He didn't think it was, he said it was doing a disservice to coddle them. So the big disagreement came with Anatoly had always climbed without oxygen. He didn't need it. He didn't use it, but he hadn't guided at altitude before. And when you're a guide, if you don't have oxygen, you can't do certain things for your clients. For one thing, you can't stand around. If your clients are going slowly, you can't slow down with them because you'll get hypothermia and frostbite, because oxygen doesn't only just provide what you need for your muscles and your heart to work. It keeps you warm. So Anatoly, he went down ahead of all his clients, and he had to because he had decided not to use oxygen. I criticized him for that, and a lot of people said, well, how can you criticize him? He was the hero. He saved lives, and he did. He heroically risked his life to bring in 3 clients from the far side of the South Col. But, one thing that I want to make clear is Anatoly was a hero. He did that. But those clients got down to the col from the upper mountain because the junior guide, Neil Beidelman, got them there. No one realized that Neil was at least as much of a hero as Anatoly was. He risked his life at least as much. And with some of the stronger clients like Clef Schoening, they all got down to the South Col. So I don't know. I can't. You should read all the books. There's like 25 books now about 1996, and read them all.
Documentaries as well. I watched one last night. Yeah.
So there's a lot. People can look at them and make up their own mind. That's what I recommend.
We're talking about the 30th anniversary of Into Thin Air. It's a book written by Jon Krakauer. We'll have more after a quick break. This is all of it. You're listening to All of It on WNYC. I'm Allison Stewart. My guest is author Jon Krakauer. It's the 30th anniversary of the fatal disaster on Mount Everest that took 8 lives. It was the subject of Jon's acclaimed book, Into Thin Air, a personal account of the Mount Everest disaster. A new edition is out now with a new introduction. I want to read this text to you. It says, can you discuss the cultural responsibility of Westerners in the context of adventure travel? Hearing about the changes on Everest over the years between Sherpas and Western climbers may be similar to surfing, diving, and other sports in many countries.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time comparing it to those other sports. The impact of, when I climbed Everest, I was the 621st person to do it in 1996. Since then, over those 30 years, 13,000 people have climbed it. Right now, as we speak, 1,000 people, half clients, half Sherpa guides, are about to head for the summit. So the crowds make a huge mental impact, a huge cultural impact. The people living in that area, the Khumbu region, are mostly Sherpa, but there's some other ethnic groups too, the Rai, the Tamang. But the economy, the tourist economy is huge, and it's welcome and by those people. So on one hand, they want all those climbers and trekkers. On the other hand, there's a lot of environmental impact that is not great, especially on Everest. Everest now, things are getting better. Nepal is there's so much corruption, and the government's been so dysfunctional that when they make regulations, they're usually just ignored. But now there's new regulations about climbers on Everest have to carry out their feces, their human waste. They have to carry out a certain number of kilograms of trash. So all that's for the good. But with 1,000 people climbing it every year, it's really hard to keep up with it, to get ahead of the damage, let alone keep up with it. So yeah, there's real impacts, at least from climbing.
What was your experience with the Sherpas? How were they treated when you climbed Everest? They're an indigenous group, ethnic to Nepal.
Yeah, I mean, there's it's interesting because the first ascent of Everest was made by a Sherpa, Tenzing Norgay, and Sir Edmund Hillary. And they had tremendous respect for each other. They viewed each other as equals. They made it clear that Tenzing was at least as strong a climber. So there was this equity, this equality from the start. But in the years, in the tradition of India and imperial India, there were the sahibs, the white people, and the coolies who carried the loads and did the work, and from that was always sort of misunderstood. It wasn't true. There were a lot of really strong Sherpa climbers, but so when I was there, it was sort of in a transition period. I remember our guides would refer to the Sherpas as the boys. Send the boys up the hill for more, to bring up more fuel. But there's also tremendous respect. I mean, Rob Hall went out of his way to make it easy for us to get to know the Sherpas who worked for him. We would sometimes eat dinner, some of us in their cook tent, and I made a lifelong friend with the base camp cook, Chungpa Sherpa, who has since become really involved with the Khumbu Climbing Center that we started, that Conrad Anker and Jenny Lowe started in 2004, 2005, to train Sherpas, to teach them climbing skills. So it's been this, they just didn't get the respect from elite climbers, and the Westerners still controlled all the guide services. That has changed completely. Right now, most of the guide services, the vast majority, are owned by Sherpas. The Sherpas who work in them, they are the most skilled guides on the mountain. The Sherpas are profiting from it. The Sherpas are also the Sherpas who own the companies are still exploiting the Sherpas who work for them. But that's better than foreigners doing it. So it's in transition. Sherpas get so much respect now, and they deserve it, which is a really good thing.
Let's take a few more calls. Barbara is calling in. Barbara, thank you for taking the time to call all of it. You're on the air.
Thank you for taking my call. And Mr. Krakauer, I've read all your books. I really like your writing. So when I turned 50, 31 years ago, I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. And then your book came out, and I gobbled it up. And much of what you are saying now, I know it's not the same thing because we don't climb Kilimanjaro. You walk up, and it's 10,000 feet less. But so much of what you wrote is similar. The guides take everything. They carry your water, your wood, your food, everything, and basically you walk to the next destination. The other thing is about what you said about lack of oxygen. The last stop is 15,000 feet, and people begin to feel the lack of oxygen, and I went all the way to the top, but I felt terribly hungover the whole time. And I was very proud because there were 50 of us who made the final ascent, and only 23 made it. And I was the oldest and also the slowest. And after 15,000 feet, I don't know if you walked Kilimanjaro, but at least when I went, after 15,000 feet, it was disgusting in terms of the litter, especially in terms of human feces. And I'd be very curious to know if they're trying to clean that out. And what you said about the impact, because most of the people who walk Kilimanjaro are, of course, either Europeans or Australians. And I remember I asked my guide if anybody from, Nairobi or Tanzania or Nigeria climbed, and he looked at me as if I was just nuts.
Thank you so much for calling, Barbara. Did you want to respond to anything there?
Yeah, I have not climbed Kilimanjaro, but I know that the Mount Aconcagua, a little higher, almost 23,000 feet, they had the same problem. And working with the guide services, it has been completely changed. They really have cleaned up Aconcagua, and I think they could do that with the Kilimanjaro too, if that's still necessary.
This says from Christopher in Greenpoint, I love this book so much. I found one of the most powerful moments to be about the moment during the descent, still near the summit, when J.K. turned off his oxygen to save a supply, or so he thought. What happened next was chilling and frightening, and I'd love to hear his take on that moment now.
Oh, it was frightening. So I was on my way down. I was just below the summit. I knew I was stupidly had not taken my third bottle up with me to the summit. I thought I'd pick it up on the way down. So I thought I have just enough to make it down. So I was hurrying down. I got to the top of the most technical part, the Hillary step that you have to rappel. And as I was about to clip into the rappel line, I looked down and there were 30 people coming up a single rope. I was stuck there waiting for 90 minutes. My oxygen ran out after 10 minutes, and it was frightening. I mean, I felt like, I was suffocating. I felt like my brain had stopped working, and I had to get down. Part of the section below me, there were no ropes, and there were these a knife edge ridge with extreme. So I was terrified, and when it finally cleared, I went down slowly. I freaked out when I got to one of the places without a rope, and I just plunged in my ice axe and waited for someone to bring me for another guide, Mike Groom, to loan me his bottle of oxygen. But it was terrifying. That's one of the things where I did not belong there because I lacked the experience to know what I was risking by saying, you know what, I think I can get up to the top and back to the South Summit in time. That was the stupid thing that almost cost me my life.
Let's talk to Steve, who's calling in from Rockland County. Steve, thank you for making the time to call All of It. You're on the air with Jon Krakauer.
Well, thank you for your show, and also it's a pleasure talking to you, John. I've really enjoyed your books, etc. I grew up in Southern California, and as a kid, we used to go out to Claremont to my grandparents' house, and they lived next to somebody that had summited. It was either Hillary. It was one of the earliest summiters, but. That book had always, that climb and Kilimanjaro had always been in my thoughts. And then when your book came out, I was driving up the New Jersey Turnpike, and I couldn't put it down. I had to read while I was driving.
I don't want to hear that, by the way. Sir?
Yeah, is there any police on the thing, But then recently, I climbed Kilimanjaro 2 years ago, and I'd be sitting on the mountain, and it's not a climb; it's a heavy walk. But people come by and say, "How old are you?" And I'd say, 79. They go, "What the F are you doing up here?"
Thank you so much for calling in. I did want to talk to Alex in Carroll Gardens. This is an interesting question.
Yeah,
Alex, thank you so much for calling All of It.
Hey, yeah, thanks for taking my call, and yeah, it's really exciting to talk with John. Thank you for all the writing you've done. I was wondering, kind of as a climber, I climb in the Gunks a lot, and in New York State, and a little bit around the country. But I was kind of curious how you think people's risk tolerance has changed with, not only social media but just media in general. Like we just saw Alex Honnold solo Taipei 101, which was a bit of a publicity stunt. But, we even have things like the HBO doc, The Dark Wizard, about Dean Potter that just came out. Mm-hmm. And, this thing that is a very personal pursuit has now become like a very public display. And I do wonder if you have thoughts on, even since you climbed Everest and all the mountaineering and kind of alpinism you've done, if you feel like that has maybe changed people's risk tolerance or,
It's definitely... It's really a good question, and it's very kind of disturbing to me because climbing when I started was this countercultural thing, and taking risks was really, we valued that. The people who took the most risk with the most control, like if you were just reckless and you didn't value your life, those people were shamed. But if you gain prestige by doing the hardest climbs without a rope. And so I saw value in that. I mean, I've been highly criticized by friends like, you're setting bad examples. And one is. I mean, I don't know how to answer that because a lot of the climbers I knew who were doing that really hard stuff, they were they had to do it. It's what they had to do to live. That doesn't make sense unless they were tormented. It gave them purpose. It actually was good for them if they didn't get killed. That's sort of paradoxical, but that's how I saw it. I don't know. I mean, I think, unfortunately, a lot of people see Alex Honnold or see the film, The Dark Knight, and are going to do stuff that they shouldn't be doing because they don't understand how serious those people, Alex, for instance, takes it. He has incredible control, and he's taking very calculated risks. I worry about him all the time. I know him, but I don't think he's less likely to get killed than I am because I don't climb stuff nearly as hard, but I lack his focus, his control. So yeah, it's hard. It's a good question. When someone dies, I mean, climbing to me is one of the most glorious activities there is. But when someone dies, to have to justify it to the people who love them is impossible and really, really discouraging. And I've had to do that several times, and most climbers I know have had to do that because we've all lost close friends. It's not something that should be taken lightly.
Jon, when you came back, you opened up about having PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
What were mental health services like 30 years ago?
I don't know because I wouldn't try them.
Yeah.
I mean, I was one of those people who was convinced I didn't have PTSD. If I did, it wasn't a problem. My wife would have tried to tell me very differently. And it wasn't until I went to Afghanistan for my one of my other books about Pat Tillman and came back, and I had been impressed with the sacrifices the soldiers and Marines made over there. So I hung out with them and worked on their nonprofit, and they invited me. They said, hey, you should. We have group therapy every Tuesday night. You should come. And I was like, group therapy? Why would I want group therapy? Well, because we can tell from your book you have got PTSD. I said, no, I don't. And they bugged me for a couple of years to come. And finally, I said, well, okay, if you promise to stop asking me, I'll come 3 times. Then I went for the next 7 years, and it really, really helped me. It's hard to explain how. It was kind of magical, but these were half Vietnam-era vets, half younger guys who'd been to Iraq and Afghanistan, and they knew PTSD, and they knew the importance of support and listening. And I didn't serve like all of them did, but they got to know me, and they trusted me, and they really, really helped me. I mean, yeah.
I bet. It's interesting in looking at the book, and it sort of jumps out at me, a personal account of the Mount Everest disaster. When you think about it, it's a personal account. It's
very much so. And I think that's important.
You're right?
Yeah, because, I mean, as we've talked about, at altitude, everyone's memory is different.
Yeah.
And so my personal account, that's my personal account. You can have your personal account. This is mine. You should remember that. This is how I experienced it. I saw it. I'm not going to say yours is wrong necessarily. So you have to understand that this is a very personal thing for me. When I got back, I was criticized by an AP, it was an AP reporter, a respected one, who said, look, you made yourself part of the story. I'm a war reporter, and we stay out of the story. We just report on what happened. I pointed out to him, but my book was like I was a soldier. I was both the soldier and the reporter. So I could not report it without reporting my personal experiences. I was in the mix. I had a profound effect on the outcome. One of the sources of my shame and guilt is that I believe my presence on the mountain contributed strongly to the bad decisions made by Rob Hall and maybe Scott Fisher because they knew a reporter was in their midst and was going to write about it. So, yeah, I don't know how I could have separated those things.
My guest has been Jon Krakauer. The book is Into Thin Air, the 30th anniversary edition. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.